Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Ulcerative Colitis 101 video chat. My name is Alyssa Strauss. I'm one of the managers of patient education for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. We're glad you could join us this evening. You or your loved one may have been recently diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, or perhaps you may have been diagnosed years ago and don't really fully understand your disease. So we're glad you could join us. Being diagnosed with a chronic disease like ulcerative colitis can be overwhelming, but learning as much as you can about it, you can be an informed and active partner in your care. So I'm excited today to be joined by our two experts. We have with us Dr. Karlee Ausk, who's a gastroenterologist with Swedish Health in Seattle, Washington. She's also a member of our foundation's Patient Education Committee. And then we also have with us Rebecca Babcock, who is from New York City, and she is an ulcerative colitis patient. She's a member of our National Patient Ed Advisory Task Force and also an active volunteer for the Greater New York chapter. So Dr. Ausk and Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thank you for having us. This is great.
So I'm just going to introduce a few things. So for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, Rebecca and Dr. Ausk are going to answer some commonly asked questions about symptoms, treatments, and management of ulcerative colitis. We just want to give a big thank you to the sponsors of tonight's Facebook chat. We have Bristol Myers Squibb, Genentech, Gilead Sciences, and Pfizer. Additional support is provided through the Foundation's annual giving program and donors. So we want this to be interactive. Please comment the video below the video. There's a little chat box. You could tell us who you are, where you're from, and of course, don't forget to ask questions. Just a few important disclaimers before we get started. The information provided during today's chat is meant for educational purposes only. The views shared during the chat do not represent the official position of the Foundation. We want to make sure you always consult with a physician when making any changes to your IBD treatment regimen. And tonight's topic is on ulcerative colitis. So if you have questions about other topics related to inflammatory bowel disease, we won't have time to get to them tonight, but we encourage you to reach out to our IBD Help Center with all of your questions, and they can be emailed directly, and the address is info@crohnscolitisfoundation.org. Or you can call directly, a toll-free number 1-888-MY-GUT-PAIN. So now that that's out of the way, let's get started. So Dr. Ausk, let's start with you. First things first, we hear the term, ulcerative colitis referred to as IBD, or inflammatory bowel disease. Can you explain what IBD is?
Yeah, so IBD stands for inflammatory bowel disease, and what that represents is inflammation in the lining of the intestine. And specifically in ulcerative colitis, that's inflammation in the most superficial lining of the colon or the large intestine. And that's a big difference with Crohn's disease, which could affect the small intestine as well. And so it's a type of autoimmune inflammation where a person's body is leading to inflammation in this lining. And that's what leads to the symptoms and sometimes complications.
Okay, so you explained a little bit about how it's different from Crohn's disease. Could you maybe go into that a little bit more, because we hear those terms sort of interchangeably, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and I want people to really understand that there is a difference between the two. There are similarities, but differences as well.
Yeah, so it can be sometimes kind of confusing, and even up to 15 or 20% of the time, it can be hard to tell the difference between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. But some of the features are that ulcerative colitis should only be in the colon or the large intestine. So it shouldn't be in your small intestine or in your stomach or other places, which Crohn's disease can be. Ulcerative colitis also involves just the most superficial layer of the colon. So we think of Crohn's disease as inflaming the entire intestine wall, but ulcerative colitis just the innermost layer. And then ulcerative colitis typically starts at the very bottom of the colon, and it may extend up a small distance, a few centimeters, and that might be called ulcerative proctitis. Or it could extend up to a third of the colon or maybe the entire colon. But it typically starts at the bottom and continues through in a continuous fashion until it stops, either through part of the colon or the entire colon.
Thank you. And how would a patient be diagnosed with ulcerative colitis? How would they know they have it?
Often they develop symptoms like diarrhea or blood in their stool, or sometimes just low blood counts. And that might lead them to have blood tests, but mainly a colonoscopy is really the kind of gold standard of diagnosing ulcerative colitis, because you can see the inflammation and you can take biopsies and get more detailed information through the pathologist to make the clear diagnosis. So most commonly through the colonoscopy.
And is there something that causes ulcerative colitis? I know some patients may think it's genetic, or they did something that caused it. So can you explain a little bit about the causes and explain, is it genetic or not?
Well, there's still some unknowns here. So there is a genetic kind of predisposition or a genetic component to it. Scientists have been able to identify certain genes that might be risk factors to develop ulcerative colitis. But everybody who has those genes may not go on to get ulcerative colitis. So there's also an aspect of it that's a little bit unclear. There's some sort of environmental trigger that triggers someone's immune system to start this inflammatory process. And our body should recognize that it's not supposed to be inflaming their own colon, but it doesn't recognize that, and this inflammatory process continues. So there are a lot of theories for what those stimuli could be, like diet or our microbiome or medications, but we really don't yet know exactly what it is that triggers it to start.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Rebecca now. So you were diagnosed when you were a teenager, right? Okay, so can you share a little bit about what it was like when you were diagnosed and what you were experiencing at the time, and sort of what went through your mind a little bit when you found out about your diagnosis?
Yes. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me. And also, I'm just so excited that there's people who have joined and want to hear more about this, because it's really important, and certainly something that I wasn't joining when I was first diagnosed. So the more you know, the sooner you know, I think the better for everybody. So I was diagnosed at 16. I had all of the symptoms the doctor was talking about. And it was very overwhelming and scary at first, because I didn't understand and I felt, different than my friends. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful looking back on it was that my gastroenterologist at the time didn't tell me that much more than what I needed to know in that moment. So she wasn't like, look, this may end up going this way or that way. It was sort of what I needed to, as a 16-year-old, to know how to manage my disease and take care of myself, but also was so helpful to really understand kind of from the bat that it wasn't anything that I had done wrong, and it wasn't a fault of mine. It was just something that happened. And it was a relief also, honestly, to know what it was after months of testing and, just being unsure and feeling sick.
So what were you feeling? What were some of those symptoms, if you don't mind sharing?
Rectal bleeding was the major one. Like, who knows how long. I'd always had not a great stomach. I'd always had diarrhea. It's funny, I finally made my father admit that I'm not just a picky eater. Like, I actually had a stomach ache a lot as a kid. But it was rectal bleeding that really, I was very afraid, and I was young, and it was before the days of, believe it or not, the internet. So maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But yeah, it took a while from when the bleeding started, and took not that long, but maybe 4 or 5 months until we finally got a diagnosis.
So Dr. Ausk, we talked about ulcerative colitis being it's chronic. And right now there are no cures, but there are a lot of options for treating it and managing it. So can you maybe share with us a little bit about some of those treatment options? And I know you're an adult GI, but can you share, is there a difference in treating kids versus adults?
Sure. So, we could spend many hours on this topic. So I'm going to try to keep it a little bit basic, but I think the key of learning more is doing what you're doing now, of logging on and learning. And the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation website has a lot of information about these different treatments, but also, having a dialogue with your doctor about what are all my options and what might be the pros and cons of these different things. So if I think, not uncommonly, someone might get put on a steroid because that can control symptoms in the short term. But in truth, we like to avoid steroids as much as possible because they have a lot of bad side effects in the long term. They do increase risk of infection, and they affect your bone health and a lot of complications. So whenever we can find things that aren't steroids to treat you, that's what we try to do. So there are oral medicine pills called mesalamine, and those are approved for mild to moderate ulcerative colitis. And that's they aren't the strongest things that they have, but they also have more of an anti-inflammatory effect. So they don't really suppress your immune system, and they don't put you at higher risk for infection. So when they work, they're a relatively easy medicine to take. The next kind of most common thing that people have been on in the past would be a pill like azathioprine or mercaptopurine. Now we're getting into pills that might affect your immune system a little bit. So it makes you a little more at risk for infection, and there can be more lab monitoring that has to go into people who take those pills. Then if you get to the next class, you start to get this family of medicines called biologic medicines. And that just means that rather than being a pill, it's actually an antibody that's targeting a specific protein of inflammation in your body. And so it can't be it's too big of a molecule to be packaged into a pill. It has to be packaged into a syringe that's given either by IV that a nurse gives to you, or a syringe that you give yourself under the skin. So some common examples of biologic medicines would be things like infliximab or adalimumab or golimumab. Those are all in the same family called anti-TNF. So TNF is a inflammatory protein. So these biologic medicines block that inflammatory protein. And those have been used now for over 20 years and are quite effective against moderate to severe ulcerative colitis. They do have some effect on the immune system. So there's certain, risks that come along with that, but they can be used quite effectively and safely for somebody with ulcerative colitis. Recently, there's been some newer developments. So one of the newer ones is called vedolizumab, and that one is targeted on receptors that are only in the GI tract. So the advantage to that is that it might have a more focused effect, and it also should have less side effects for the rest of your body, so less immune suppression than some of the other medicines. And then you may see on commercials that there's a new pill for ulcerative colitis. That's what patients often say, oh yeah, I've seen commercials for that. So that's called tofacitinib. And it also has its own immune suppressing potential, but it is a new oral medication that's now available that targets different receptors of markers of inflammation to decrease the inflammatory proteins. And so really the main theme is that all of these are working on trying to decrease the production of these inflammatory cytokines. Many of them have some degree of immune suppression or immune regulation, but I think the key is that that can alarm some people and make them feel that, I don't want to be immune suppressed, especially in this era of COVID. But in fact, these medicines are found to be safer than, say, prednisone or steroids, and they can be used really safely. And the benefit of a medication that works to get your colitis into remission far outweighs some of these small risks. But I think the key is to know what risks are and to try to choose a situation that kind of fits you the best.
And all of those medications that you talked about, those are both for children and adults?
Oh, yeah, yes. Some of the newer ones, though, really, when they start coming out, they're mainly for adults because that's the population we know most about and feel most comfortable in studying them in. And so mainly the things used in pediatric patients are usually the anti-TNF medications like infliximab or adalimumab, or the gut-specific sort of vedolizumab, or getting some more knowledge about it. In pediatric and adult, we treat, granted, I'm an adult gastroenterologist, so I don't treat kids, but generally the medication options are very much the same. I think the focus is slightly different. In the pediatric groups, they're still growing and developing and going through puberty. And so there is a little bit more of a focus on making sure that the kids are meeting those milestones and able to grow and develop their, bones and puberty and everything kind of as they would expect them to. Whereas when I see a newly diagnosed adult patient, they've often gone through that process, and we're more focused on kind of healing their colon and keeping them from developing complications later in life. And so in the pediatric population, as much as adult GI doctors, we try to avoid steroids, they try even more, because it's really going to impact how well someone's skeleton and bones are going to grow. And that's the biggest difference.
And then you talked about a lot of different types of medications. So how would a doctor and a patient maybe decide on the best medication for that person, or the best course of treatment?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of a hard subject to cover in just like a short amount of time, because it really does. I think this is where it's important to have a relationship with your doctor and a good kind of understanding and dialogue of where your situation is, and why one of these medicines might be more useful. So for me personally, what I do, I look at first is how severe their inflammation is and where it is. So if someone has only the last few inches of colon inflamed versus their entire colon, we're going to treat that pretty differently. If someone has mild symptoms, which we might define as having a few bowel movements a day, versus severe symptoms where it's like 15 bowel movements a day, we're going to treat that very differently. So how much of your colon is involved, and is it mild or moderate or severe? And we can use that. We can judge that by talking to someone about symptoms, but also by looking at their labs. If their nutritional markers are down, that would be a marker of more severe inflammation. So the more severe inflammation someone has, the more likely they are to go directly to one of the stronger medications, like one of the biologic medications, to try to get quick control over the situation. After that, I look at someone's past medical history. So do they have a reason why immune suppression might be more dangerous for them? So like someone who's elderly is at a higher risk of infection, or someone who's had a lot of infections in their life, that might be a higher risk for them than someone who hasn't. If they've had a history of cancer, other health problems, I might not want to use one of those other medicines. And then I kind of talk to them about their lifestyle too. Some of these medicines are IV infusions where they're tied to being around in the city, that to have someone come to them, or to go to infusion center to have it given to them. Whereas some are self-injections where they can have the freedom to travel, but take their medicine with them. And so there may be certain lifestyle situations that someone needs one particular mode over the other. So it really is kind of assessing how severe, and then trying to find something that meets their needs in terms of the risk plus their lifestyle needs.
Thank you. So question for you. So you're taking these medications. Is it possible for it to get worse over time? Like stay the course, get worse, get better?
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully not, but I can't say impossible, honestly. So our goal of medicine, I think this is maybe something that not everyone knows or understands, is that our goal is when a medicine is working, you are normal, right? You're not bleeding, and you're not having diarrhea, and you're not having abdominal pain. And in a perfect setting, when the medicine really works, your colon is also normal. Like we can go back and do a colonoscopy and we can take biopsies and we don't see inflammation anymore. So when we have things under good control, ideally things are not getting worse. We're keeping you from having flares and we're keeping everything quiet. Now, sometimes the medicines lose their effect, or sometimes your body could even develop antibodies against the medicine. So what once worked no longer worked. And so there is a chance of flares coming up. But if that happens, then that should be a discussion that you have with your care provider of, why did this flare happen? Is it because something changed, or is it because this medicine isn't working for me anymore?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to switch over to Rebecca now. So I know, Rebecca, we didn't talk about this with Dr. Ausk, but you actually ended up needing to have surgery.
Yes.
And to treat your disease. So I wanted to ask you just sort of how you came to that decision with your doctor, and maybe share a little bit about the procedure that you had, and how it impacted your quality of life.
Yeah, just to sort of get to the point of surgery, I first want to say I have actually, the disease journey that you shared is sort of my exact same trajectory in terms of each medication that you talked about. And I did have, so it's been 24 years since I was diagnosed. I had years of remission. I had years of being really sick. And the gauntlet kind of kept getting higher and higher in terms of this medication, but then let's add in this one. And then I did develop antibodies to medications, and it basically got to a point where I'm personally someone who's very energetic. I like to run marathons. I love to travel. And I had sort of, maybe because I was diagnosed early, I just always said, like, this is, hey guys, I have colitis. I've got to run to the bathroom, 15 times a day or whatever. There was not that much shame around it. I went to college, I joined a sorority, I did all those things. But as my disease got worse, the medications weren't helping and my life was getting more unmanageable. And my doctor kept saying to me, I think it's time to consider surgery. And my feeling was, and sorry, I have to time out for a second, for anyone who's a new patient or newly diagnosed, this does not happen to most people. And, you can live a really full, amazing life without surgery. And then I think I'm also here to say you can live a really full, amazing life after surgery, and that everyone's experience is different. This is just mine, but I don't want anyone to think just because you've been diagnosed, you're going to end up having to have surgery, or that if you do end up being told to have surgery, that you should not do it. So that was sort of my feeling. Was I said to my doctor, I don't have colon cancer. I'm not having my colon removed, because that's, with ulcerative colitis, that's really, I'll let the doctor, verify my statement. But I think that's sort of as opposed to doing removing sections, because if you take out a section of your colon, if you have colitis, it'll just come to the next section. So my whole colon was pretty much shot. And I fought it for a really long time until I actually had to have an emergency surgery. My organs were not operating properly. And as the doctor mentioned, I have been on steroids for a long time. So my immune system was not in good shape at all. So I actually had 5 surgeries over a 2.5-year span. That's not normal either, so don't worry. But I had my entire colon removed. It's called a subtotal colectomy or total colectomy. And then that could have been it. For some people, either where their disease is or their age or their lifestyle or whatever, they say, I'm good, I'm going to live with an ostomy bag. I decided to move forward and have a series of additional surgeries where they took us part of my small intestine in the shape of a J to make what they call a reservoir, if you will. So it's never going to be like a real colon, but it's called a J pouch. I guess they got a little lazy with the naming conventions. It doesn't have a fancy name. It's in the shape of a J. It's called a J pouch. So the way that those surgeries worked is I had my colon removed. I had an ostomy bag. I was so terrified. The ostomy bag was the best experience. I had never gone that length of time being able to eat and not be in pain, not be panicked about where the bathroom was, not be uncomfortable. It really gave me, shockingly, a lot of freedom. But the additional surgeries, then they made the J pouch out of my small intestine, but I kept the ostomy bag. And then I had the ostomy bag removed and what they call a reversal surgery. And they connected the J down into my rectum. And so now I live my life, is in the hashtag on my social media, no colon, still rolling. So it's not easy. The surgeries are intense and the recovery is challenging, but anybody who's at that point in their disease journey is ready for it. And my recommendation to anybody would be, don't wait too long, consider it earlier, have those conversations. It's not a defeat. It's nothing you've done wrong. I'm healthy. I'm actually still on steroids. Unfortunately, I happen to be one of those people that's become dependent from taking them for so long, but my life is so much better. I am on basically no medications other than the steroids. You know, I'm not in pain anymore. I'm not going to the bathroom 15, 20 times a day. It's a much better life. And it's a lot of freedom, a lot more freedom than I had. It's not perfect. Your small intestine is never going to be your colon. So I don't have the exact life that I would have as maybe you guys, but it's been worth it. And it's something I wish I had considered earlier and not been so afraid of the feeling like it was so drastic. I hope that's helpful.
Dr. Ausk, is there anything you want to maybe add to that as far as if a patient needs surgery or when a patient would really need surgery, just after listening to Rebecca's story?
I mean, I think Rebecca did a really good job of kind of highlighting two things. One is that most people with ulcerative colitis don't need surgery. However, I think we do tend, even as GI physicians, sometimes we tend to look at it as a defeat when it doesn't have to be. It's another treatment option. And so it's very common situations like Rebecca's where you push that as far out as possible, trying everything possible as someone gets sicker and sicker. And I think too often we don't bring this up as an option for people who the traditional medicines aren't working well for. So most traditionally, people who end up having their colon removed are either because our medicines aren't working, and unfortunately none of our medicines are 100%. And so there are people that all of these options don't work for them. Or sometimes if someone has a cancer in their colon, then they end up having this surgery too. Those are kind of the two most common reasons. But just like Rebecca says, almost universally, people who I've known who've gone through that surgery do have some such relief and improvement in their quality of life, just because they suddenly have more freedom and feel better once they have all that inflammation kind of out. So it's definitely a treatment option. It shouldn't be considered a defeat, but most people with ulcerative colitis don't get to that point.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to stick with you, Dr. Ausk. So in addition to the medicines and the surgeries, are there ways that patients can manage the disease on their own? So sometimes we think about diet and what we eat and what we put into our body. Can you explain a little bit about the role diet plays in treating or managing ulcerative colitis? And do you have any recommendations perhaps about diet and making good food choices?
Yeah. So this is like by far my most commonly asked question, I think, is because, you know, intuitively you think that what I'm putting in my body is somehow leading to this inflammation. And it's still an area that we need to learn a lot more about. So I think I'm not going to be able to tell you one diet that's going to help everyone. A lot of this currently, what we know about it depends on how you feel individually. So kind of the key of figuring out diet is listening to your body and trying things carefully, and kind of making adjustments based on how you feel. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, do this while you work with your care providing team too, because, you know, I don't think it's a matter of I'm going to do this on my own by changing diet, but have a provider who can work with you on kind of trying to adjust your diet so that you're also monitoring yourself and working on other treatment options at the same time. So there's never been one diet that's been proven to cause ulcerative colitis or a diet that's been proven to make it better. There is a lot of interest in this. So kind of one example would be this diet called the specific carbohydrate diet. So here in Seattle, the Children's Hospital is working on studying that in kids with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, where they eliminate a lot of sugars and gluten and dairy. It's a pretty strict diet. It's difficult to follow. So it's best to do with guidance of a dietitian or somebody you can make sure that you're getting enough nutrients. So that's an area that is interesting and is being researched now, but I don't think I can kind of sit here and fully say that this is going to be the diet for everyone. There's also research going into diets like the Mediterranean diet, which are lower in red meats and high in fruits and vegetables and grains. And again, it's research that's ongoing, but not that we firmly have kind of evidence to say this is what's going to do it, this is what's going to control your colitis. So personally, you know, I kind of let people know what information we know and what information we don't know. And I generally tell them that just kind of for your overall health and for the health of your microbiome in your gut, we do know that the best thing to do is to, as long as it's not irritating your symptoms, have a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and grains, and approach diet in that way. Try to minimize sugars and processed foods. But to say that I have research studies to say that's going to cure your colitis, I absolutely don't. But as you eat things, pay attention to your body. If you're in a flare, so if your colitis is very active, then sometimes eating healthy things might make you feel worse. So like eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables when you're having a colitis flare, Rebecca can tell you, may make you more uncomfortable. And so that's in those settings, it's easiest on people to kind of back down and have a blander diet with the goal of, as they heal and feel better, to be able to expand again to a more varied diet. And that's my general approach. I wish I had one firm answer because everyone asks this question, but it is a lot of variability from person to person.
Yeah, no, we know diet is so individual. And Rebecca, I was going to ask you sort of, you know, what has been your experience? Like Dr. Ausk said, obviously working with your doctor, but have there been things that you and your doctor have worked together to try, whether it's diet or maybe some other type of complementary therapy that you found to be helpful for your situation?
Yes. So I think what I was going to say in terms of diet is also, it's so interesting because every patient you speak to will tell you something totally different. So I think the most important thing in terms of diet is pun intended, trust your gut. I used to do something where I would just open up the fridge and one day the yogurt would look like, oh, that'll be good to eat. And other days I'd be like, no. And my body would kind of tell me. And I think that's important. And also to reiterate what we've talked about before, which is something my doctor, I'm really grateful, told me very early on, which was don't beat yourself up, because whatever you eat or don't eat may help, but ultimately this disease is very powerful and it does what it wants to do. So, you know, if I was only having green juice and then I have a flare up, it's not my fault because it's not, because I ate McDonald's once, I had a flare up. It's just these things, they happen. The one consistent with colitis, I think, is the change, you know, remission, flare, it all kinds of comes and goes. So I think I worked a lot with my doctor on just having a lot of awareness, also keeping a food diary. I also work with an acupuncturist. I worked with at times a craniosacral therapist. So I did a lot of kind of fusion of both worlds. I also am a really firm believer in exercise and how that helps mind, body, spirit, feeling strong. And I also, one of the things you mentioned that I think is so important as a patient, on the patient side of medications and relationship with the doctor, is to really ask a lot of questions and take your time and be your own advocate. And even at a young age, just one of, I think my regrets was being, of which I have very, very few, is being so desperately sick that I would say yes to a medication. And then it would be like, oh, by the way, for the amount of time you're going to end up being on steroids, you're going to, you know, have bone issues and all this other stuff and problems with your teeth and la la la. And so I think being your own advocate and believing and knowing that like you're doing the best you can, and being patient with the process, but also being dedicated to your own health as much as you can do it, but also asking questions. And, you know, the other thing that I think is super important as a patient is, with all due respect, doctors know a huge amount, surgeons know a huge amount, but other patients are the only one, when I had an ostomy bag, who were going to really be able to help me to figure out I had a rash and sometimes the bag would fall off and which powder is the best or whatever it might be. Or, you know, there's just certain things that only patient to patient can really help each other. And especially with a disease like this, that can feel very intimate, but also nuanced. So I think finding whoever that community is, certainly anybody who ever wants to reach out to me is more than welcome. But just to know you're not alone and ask people other than a doctor, I think is very important.
It's a good way to wrap up, actually. Thank you. That was super helpful. And I was going to ask you, Dr. Ausk, you know, from a provider perspective, you know, what advice do you have for patients or caregivers who may be having trouble managing their UC right now, ulcerative colitis?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rebecca said it really well. I think the keys are education, which you're all like doing right now, just starting at the basics and learning more. Education, advocating for yourself, find a care team that you feel like you can trust and you can relate with. And it doesn't have to be the first person that you see. We all have different personalities, and find someone that you can really trust and have a good relationship with, because this is going to be a chronic thing that you're going to deal with. And so to build that relationship and trust is really important. So I think education, advocate for yourself, take good care of yourself in other ways, like through sleep and exercise and stress control, as much as that can be controlled. And I think those are sort of there are so many things that you can't control, but I think working on what you can control, there's a lot of power in that.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much, Dr. Ausk and Rebecca. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us and for your commitment to the IBD community. Thank you all who are logging in and joining us for the chat. We hope you found it really helpful. If your question wasn't addressed tonight, as I said earlier, please reach out to our IBD Help Center. Email at the address is info@Crohn'sColitisFoundation.org, or you can call directly 1-888-MY-GUT-PAIN, which is 1-888-694-8872. We actually are having the second part of our series, our Intro to IBD series, next Tuesday on Crohn's disease 101, which is going to be on October 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Again, thank you all for joining and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.